So I can think of no better way to end the day than with this panel, because even though I think it's wonderful for us to focus on investors, the real heroes of the entrepreneurial ecosystem are the founders. And I mean all founders, white, black, rich, poor. It's really difficult to be a founder regardless of your race and gender. Only thing I would say is that it's especially difficult if you look at the numbers and you see that people like you just generally don't get funded. If it's a woman, less than 3%, even though you're 52% of the population, or if you're minority founder, usually it's less than 1%. I think someone gave the stat earlier that women and minorities are probably about 70+% of the US population and receive less than 8% of venture capital funding. So it's tough for everyone, but it's tougher for some people more than others. And so now we have the luxury then of being with a few founders who have been able to, succeed despite the odds, and I'd like to bring them to the stage. First up, we have, let's see the order that they pop up in. We have Chris, who is the CEO and co-founder of Lavender Health, who just this week announced that he's closed a round of $2 million. We have Namdi, who has raised about $4 million to date. And then we also have Grace, who I like to call her Hollywood royalty. And so she's now kind of a multi-hyphenate singer, actress, producer, dancer. I mean, I saw her earlier this summer and she's amazing. And she's beginning this journey of kind of making sure that she treats her artistic career not just as creatively, but also entrepreneurially. And I think we're waiting on Gabrielle, but we'll probably just get started in any case. So first of all, thank you guys for joining us. Like I said, you guys really are the heroes. If unicorn founders are the ones that make more than $1 billion. I think founders that get funded while being Black or otherwise diverse are the real unicorns. So thank you for joining us. Let's start with Chris, because like I said, you're the most recent kind of fundraising success story. Why don't you tell us in like a minute who you are as a person, and then probably in another minute or so, a little bit more about your business.
Yeah, sure thing. Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So I'm Chris. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO at Troglo. I am non-binary, so I go by they, them. And we just recently closed a 1.5 million pound round, which has been phenomenal with Octopus Ventures and a syndicate of incredible angels. About myself, I grew up in the Middle East, so I guess you can, take away from that, what it may feel like, or what the experience is living in countries where being LGBTQ plus is, quite tough. And so I certainly think there's a lot of privilege in the experiences I've been able to get in the US and then being able to move to the UK. But right now, the main focus is really building this phenomenal company with such amazing people, which is Lavender Health. And it's essentially addressing quite a large problem, let's say, within healthcare, which is that the community faces the largest barriers in receiving care, but they're the least catered to. And so we're essentially building a vertically integrated clinic, digital clinic that helps improve sexual health and well-being for LGBTQ plus individuals. I'm super excited to be here. So thank you, Gary, for having me.
Awesome. Okay, let's go next to Namdi. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, by the way?
You are, Gary. Great. Thank you very much for having me, Gary, and great to be on the panel. My name's Namdi Maifunwu. By way of my background, so I used to be a lawyer before I started my business and became a founder at Definely. Been very fortunate that over the course of the last 4 years running this business, I've been able to raise about £3.5 million, which is, I guess, roughly about $4 million. I grew up in Nigeria, so I'm originally from Nigeria. Came to the UK in 1993 following the fallout of the presidential elections there. So we really came as economic migrants here and settled here. And I've always been sort of really inspired by, my parents. They've really sort of given me that early drive, really. And that's what sort of led me to pursue, a law degree initially, and then going on to sort of working as a corporate lawyer. And it was actually during my my sort of venture into law where I practiced for about 4 years. I've always had a entrepreneurial mind set. And when the opportunity came to sort of look at the way lawyers actually work and realize there was a lot of inefficiencies in the way legal practice is still being done. I set about to sort of at least try and solve one of those inefficiencies, which is what ultimately led to Definely. I have some really great investors who've joined us on this journey. So most recently, we announced a £2.2 million investment, which was led by Microsoft's VC arm M12, as well as a US VC, Cree Ventures. So I feel very fortunate to have not only a great investors around me, but also a really wonderful team. So that's it.
All right, awesome. And so let's go next to Grace.
Hi, I think Gabby's in the waiting room, or the whatever you call it, the backstage, the virtual backstage. Yes, my name is Grace Gibson. I started off as actually a dancer a very long time ago, but I knew since I was 3 that I wanted to be a musician. And I think that when I first started working on music, one of the first conversations that happened was, oh, well, you can't just sing other people's songs. If you want to make any money, you have to write songs. And so ironically, people think like Mozart and all of these classical or neoclassical composers were just like being inspired by the moment, but actually they were all commissioned to write original compositions by patrons and people who were like paying to employ them or for their living or whatever. So as I like looked into the history of original composition in the classical sense, I was like, oh wow, it's not cheapening to say, hey, I want to understand the business of songwriting as well as be a performer, which I think a lot of musicians and artists, they kind of equate an importance on financial viability to like selling out. And so early in, I realized that that's not the case. And I started to write my own songs. And then I was actually at Columbia University, and I transferred to Berklee College of Music, where I received a scholarship, and I studied pro music, which is covering all the different bases kind of film scoring to songwriting to event production to I came in on voice. So I'm predominantly a vocalist. And then I ended up going to New Orleans, where I started doing my own shows and being a blues singer. And I saw just how the disparity between venue owners and the alcohol industry and the people who are selling the drinks, who are essentially the performers. So I started my first venture called the Culture Crew in 2016, producing events in New Orleans, all of my own concerts, and then my own original music, which we just put out the first song in 2021, March. And now we're getting into what I've always wanted to do, which is putting all those worlds together and making music films. So we had the first music film that we produced under the Culture Crew called River Queen Winters In, which is based on my original compositions. And that's how I met Gary. He actually came to a screening in Martha's Vineyard, a screening performance. We're going to the New Orleans Film Festival. We were just at Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival, Pan-African Film Festival of Cannes, Rhode Island International Film Festival. So I'm really seeing what we can do with a small startup in the world of creative economy, And I also founded Rock Noir, which is my newest baby that I've been working on for a long time, which is a genre, community, and movement based on the Black roots that created, sustained, and continued to revolutionize rock and roll. So my name is Grace Gibson. Nice to meet you.
Awesome. So a very kind of varied panel. So maybe let's start with, let's go back to Namdi. Tell us a little bit about kind of like your journey from being an immigrant kind of to going to a law firm. I think you were at Freshfields, so now you've made it, to then all of a sudden deciding, oh, well, it doesn't make a difference that basically like no Black people get funded in the UK. I think the numbers are something like there's been one Black woman who got funded in the UK in the last 10 years. And that there have been like 38 Black people more generally that have gotten VC funding. So I guess 37 Black men that have gotten funding over the last 10 years. Why did you just say, okay, well, I see that, I hear that, but it's all good. I'm going to quit my job and try and do this entrepreneurship thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and really the numbers are staggering. It certainly doesn't make for sort of something that entices you once you sort of hear the numbers. And actually, maybe had I been more familiar with the numbers, I probably may not have left Freshfields, right? I think it was only after the fact I realized how bad it was. But, for me, I think as I said, I've been really fortunate to, growing up. I've always had people I could look up to and who've really encouraged me to really be able to do whatever I want. I think in my household, one of the things I was definitely taught was, education and, just being ambitious and being, resilient. And I think I was lucky enough to learn that early on. And I think that really sort of set the path for my future education and then career path. I remember when I finished university, I only wanted to work at a Magic Circle law firm, Freshfields being one of them. For me, it was like, if I didn't get into a firm like Freshfields, then I was just going to wait and keep going until I did it. And I was lucky enough to do it. And actually, I did that I think it was my second attempt or my third attempt that I eventually got there. So that sort of really gave me that sort of early sort of resilience early on. When I was practicing as a lawyer, I enjoyed it. Law is not for everybody. I certainly enjoyed it for a bit, but then I realized that I wanted more. I've always had this, as I said, entrepreneurial mindset about me. And actually, interestingly enough, as a lawyer, you're sort of taught to mitigate risk and avoid risk because you're always sort of advising your clients on how to protect them and guard against risk. But I've always thought I've been slightly different to the normal sort of legal personality. And I was fortunate enough to actually meet somebody during my practice. So someone at Freshfields, my co-founder, who had a visual impairment actually. And I set out to solve a problem for him. So it was actually a really interesting journey because I set out to essentially create software that solved a problem for somebody who had a visual impairment. And it was only when I created the prototype of that software, I sort of quickly and instinctively realized it could apply to everybody, not just himself. So I then set out to grow this business and work on this full time. In terms of the funding landscape, it is hard. I'm not going to sit here and suggest that it was easy. It definitely was not easy. We spoke to a lot of investors, a lot of VCs. We got a lot of no's, a lot of rejections. But I think, one thing law certainly taught me is just having that, thick skin, that tough skin, not taking, if one door shuts on your face, find a window, go to the back door and see if that's ajar and see if you can get in that way. You just have to, have a thick skin and just keep going because I think you need that to really go and make any progress from an investment point of view.
Perfect. And I think we just had our last panelist, Gabrielle, join us. She is the CEO and editor-in-chief of Meth Eater magazine. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Gabrielle, thank you for joining us. Sorry about the difficulties you had kind of getting in.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. My apologies on the difficulties. I actually moved to a new apartment, so my Wi-Fi is brand new, so it needs to be troubleshooted. But I appreciate being here. So thank you so much, Gary.
No, awesome. Well, I mean, one of the things that we did before you came on is we just asked for each person to give like a 1-minute introduction to who you are and then a quick introduction as to your business.
All right, I'll go right ahead. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabrielle. My business is a multimedia company. We are mostly on digital, but we are looking to move in other spaces such as live event and a bit of print, even though my predecessor said not to go there, but I love it, so I want to try it. We are based in New York, moving to Atlanta. That's hence the new space down here. We are focused on Gen Z and millennial. I actually met Gary through Grace, who was on the cover with her amazing mother for Mother's Day. We focus on the LGBT community, Black girls around the world, and of course, Black men and people of color. We are, of course, mostly based in North America, but we have some great audiences internationally, such as London, Paris, Lagos, and Cape Town. The goal is really to be an amazing representation of the culture and be recognized as such. I'm actually partners with my mother. We started it back in 2012 when I was in college. And we are cash positive, and I'm very happy with how things are going. So yeah, that's a little bit about the business.
No, awesome. So I'm going to come back to you, but I guess next up, I'm going to ask Chris, same question. I guess like being kind of, Lebanese and then kind of non-binary, there's still kind of like a lot of homophobia in the startup ecosystem. I think numbers are there as well that like less than 1% of LGBTQ plus founders kind of get funding, and something like 23% are actually hiding their sexuality in the funding process because they know it can be a barrier to what can sometimes be a very kind of like bro finance sector approach to investing in startups. So what was your experience like?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Yeah, those stats are, from Rich Cook. I'm pretty sure the numbers are higher. It's like pretty crazy. Like as it is, like if you think about fundraising in general, like the barrier is quite, like thick to kind of move forward to the next step. And then if you add that other layer of complexity, which is, being a part of an underrepresented group and identifying as your non-traditional founder that is raising and being open about it is kind of extremely difficult to do. So it's multiple layers of challenges that you need to overcome. And I think when we first started raising back in Jan, I certainly wasn't adding my pronouns, for example, which was like one of the main things that I found challenging during this process, is just having to introduce myself and correct individuals when needed. And so that the misgendering side of things certainly plays an element to it. And it's just coming into those meetings with somebody, assigning their understanding of what that means to them, rather than being more attuned to the needs of diverse founders. And so I think there were a lot of challenges along the road in speaking to large funds that were interested in sexual health in general. I think explaining the concept of the need for the career health, the challenges, questions that were asked during the process, I think went to everything from, this market's not really big enough, or I don't really understand the problem. Aren't people within the NHS and like clinicians already trained? And the questions that are asked, I think partly are due to ignorance. Perhaps it's just some part of it is certainly discrimination. So I do think it was a challenging process. But over time, what I did was mentally reframe, which is essentially, if this investor is saying, hey, I feel more comfortable investing in your company if you cater to the wider needs of anybody who's sexually active, that's essentially saying, hey, I'll invest in your company if you change, what you're aiming to achieve. And so we actually walked away from an entire deal that strung us along for 3 months, and we could have closed this round in basically a month. And we walked away from it because of that. I think it's important as founders to remind ourselves that we're giving up a part of our company, something that we want to exist in this world. And so we really shouldn't be compromising on values. We shouldn't be compromising on who gets a stake in your company. And so I think keeping all of those things in mind whilst you fundraise is so important to optimize for success, because these people are likely to be on your board. They're likely to be on the journey for the next, however long it takes to kick it off and until exit or other. But I think those are such important parts to weigh in, is who do you want to work with, and don't compromise. I think those kind of were my two takeaways. From like a background ethnicity perspective, I don't think I struggled as much. My accent is not a heavy Middle Eastern one. Although I did grow up there for 20 years, I was educated in American high school, and so that element didn't come into play much. But yeah, that's kind of my take, but happy to answer in more detail if you have any further questions.
I'm going to ask you and Namdi a question before I go over to Grace and Gabrielle, because they had very different experiences, which is, did you find it easier then to kind of go after investors that kind of shared some sort of an affinity with you, like Namdi go after like Black investors, immigrant investors, or Chris go after like gay investors? Like I know we share an investor, which is Gangels. Also, I know that maybe some of the investors you've spoken to have themselves, the partners have been LGBTQ, which then meant there wasn't this need to maybe explain as much, or is this a real problem? Tell us a little bit about kind of how did you choose your investors, or in reverse, how did your investors choose you? Let's start with Namdi.
Yeah, I think for me, certainly my very first investor, and actually one thing I will encourage everybody to do is, look at your network. When I first left Freshfields, I sort of went through, I guess, probably a very typical process. I thought, hey, let me try and see, who in the world is going to come and invest in this idea I had. And I signed up for various sort of, angel, investor sort of, programs, and paid my money, and I met with various investors. And actually, I think we shortlisted two investors who we had various meetings with, and they agreed to invest. But actually, at the end of it, we realized that they wouldn't be a good fit. I realized they wouldn't be a good fit for this company. So I actually ended up saying no to them. And it was actually when I said no, and having gone through this process, I think that process took about 3 to 4 months. I was back to square one again. And I thought to myself, man, I've just said no to this really, at the time it was only £150,000. And, I had said no, and I was back to square one. I was like, what am I doing? And what I decided to do was just go back to my network. And I went back to my old boss. And I sent him an email. Within 30 seconds, he responded saying, yeah, why didn't you ask me? It sort of really taught me about actually, do not underestimate the power of your network for that very first money into your company, because it's still an idea. People are trying to back you as an individual. Your concept is nothing other than a concept, right? And you haven't really achieved any traction. So who's going to believe in you more than people that know you? People, your family members, your friends, people, your colleagues that you've worked with. So certainly do not sort of underestimate the power of that. And then as you sort of make more progress, then it's more about, okay, what traction have you achieved? So now sort of having people like M12 and Crevet VC on board, they're looking more at the traction and sort of the market opportunity. The conversation gets a little bit more sophisticated. But I think when you, and it can, some of them can be strategic. So M12 for us, we started our software as a plugin to Microsoft Word. What better investor in the universe of investors to have than Microsoft, right? So we felt really, really lucky to have them on board. So I think when you first start, certainly don't be shy about asking people people in your immediate network to just give you that first money you need to build the traction that you require for sort of the more professional investors later on.
Good advice. Okay, so let's go to Chris.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the raise itself, like is it more about investors not getting it, or is it about getting them to care about it? And I think like that's one that I struggled with a lot. I think for us, talking about the problem and explaining how underfunded it is for the community here in this part of the world was certainly challenging, because the numbers aren't really there to back it. So pitching to investors, initially I 100% was starting to go on AngelList and prospect LGBTQ plus investors or companies in Hornet or Grindr, and just kind of reverse and say, okay, if these founders who are openly queer have raised money, then maybe that's a way that we could understand what worked for them and what didn't. And so a lot of energy was spent on pursuing LGBTQ plus investors, and there are not that many. And so we hit a wall. We definitely did raise a safe note with the investor that we share in common, Gary. And so I think getting support at that early stage did kind of boost us forward from a confidence perspective, and someone does believe in what we're building. And then two is really, okay, what do we do from here? It's clear that targeting our own community isn't really progressing the fundraising process. And so I think it then just became more about really identifying if there was a unique or a unified message for why investors were saying no. So as you can imagine, hundreds of calls, tons of no's at the first call, tons of no's with a justification at the third or fourth call. I think you just need to really see what is the core challenge there, And for us, it always came down to market size is not big enough because you can't justify it because the data is not there. And so the entire process was not the best use of my time. I think after shifting from we're going to like LGBTQ plus investors to we're going to investors in healthcare, that's when things started to change. So we went, straight towards the top tier healthcare funds, social impact funds as well, and we didn't end up landing capital from VCs or angels that were very like impact or social good driven. But what seemed to resonate with healthcare investors is the fact that the system is broken, but it wasn't really about for the LGBTQ community. It was just like the healthcare system needs to be improved. And so the way I was pitching it, if I removed like 3 or 4 slides, it wasn't really about the community and the struggles. It was more about this is a problem that exists within the public health system in the UK and more broadly for Europe. And then painting that picture of this is how large it is, but then let's actually take a look at the numbers that exist for LGBTQ plus individuals, where you have like 1 in 7 that are mistreated, 1 in 8 for no healthcare, 42% of transgender individuals are mistreated, and that cycle that creates itself. And so that entire process was extremely difficult to convince people that this is something that needs to exist. And the way that we locked in our lead, which I think was when everything shifted, was the simplest thing. It was LinkedIn. And I saw a post by the principal at Octopus Ventures, who essentially was saying, I'm struggling to start a family, or I'm looking for family like planning solutions. And there are companies in the US like Folks and Get Plume who have also just recently raised like jointly like something like 50 million. And so that was a massive signaling factor to let's call it like queer tech or technology solutions that should exist for this community. And so after we got that term sheet, a lot of investors now wanted to participate because a tier 1 fund was interested in what we were building. I question like how much of it is you now understand the problem versus somebody has now said, this is your term sheet, we're going to give you this much money, and then everyone else has now drawn interest. But then from that moment, we built an entire group of syndicate of angels, majority of which are female, and I think we have tons of LGBTQ plus investors as well. So it seems to have, evolved in that way, which I'm really proud of. But I do think it was, certainly challenging, and not having somebody from within the community who truly did understand the problem. I'm not entirely sure if we would have raised successfully or if it would have taken longer. So I'm actually quite grateful that somebody in VC was open about their sexual orientation and shared the same struggles, but then also went the extra mile in explaining the problem to their colleagues, which I think was equally important, as having like a startup founder pitch the problem to VC versus a VC on the same like playing field with other VCs having those conversations, I think does start to shift the dynamic a bit. And so I'd love to see more of that happen for future founders.
Awesome. And so now we're off to Grace. Gabrielle might still be having some connectivity issues, but Grace, you're in a whole different space. I mean, in some senses, it's the same space because from what I read, the term angel investor actually comes from people in Hollywood investing in films at the beginning. And then I guess eventually they went on to tech companies in some cases. But what's your experience been like in terms of trying to finance your, entrepreneurial ambition? I think like creative people are entrepreneurs. I mean, you basically have to you're the product, and you then have to kind of like monetize it. A lot of people choose to kind of go a more corporate route, which is like, well, let me just get the record label to pay everything, and they'll make 99% of the money and I'll take like 1%. But then you have some people who are more entrepreneurial who say, no, actually, I'll take the risk and I'll do it myself. What's that like? And how do you get funded? I think you're on mute. You're on mute.
I would say that the biggest risk in taking that risk is time. And are you willing to sacrifice your time? And like as a woman performer, I look back and I like wonder some of my decisions. and keeping that independence, was it the wisest decision? You know, like when you say 150,000 pounds, Namdi, that you were offered that first time, I was offered 150,000 euros, you know, when I was 19 to sign to a French record label, because I'm also bilingual and half British. And I didn't, and I said no. Do you know what I mean? And then in turn, when I was shopping a record label when I was 19 in France, I got someone that I knew who believed in me. They actually said, here, I'll give you 5,000 pounds. I mean, not pounds, euros, which, you know, for the dollar, we were like, when we brought it back to America, did a little bit more. Thank you, Jesus. And, you know, you put together your package and you come back here and see what the offers are. Because essentially a label that I was interested in at the time, when I was interested in that world, had said, come back with a package. Like, we love you, but we need to see what happens. You know, come back with a package, put out a video, see what the response is. So we did all the right things. And it was a really good first entree to me into, I guess, that spirit of entrepreneurship, because I basically went into a meeting with this finance company, and it was in French, and I was working with this French guy at the time, and he was like, you know, elle est comme un yaourt, on doit le vendre. And I was like, whoa. In French, that means, you know, Grace is a person, but elle est comme un produit, like she's like a product, she's like a yogurt. We got to sell her. And I was like, hold up, un yaourt quoi? Je suis plutôt comme un diamant. I was like, a yogurt? No, I'm more like a diamond, okay? So it was very interesting, you know, being 19 in another language, in another country, having to advocate for myself. And then in turn, in that meeting, when he heard me speak on the business aspect of like Grace Gibson Incorporated, that he took me seriously enough to say, let me give you 5,000 euros and like see what you do with it. And we did all the things with it. And what it did was give me a great starter package. When I came back to the States, you know, I was working with producers and labels and all this stuff to be able to present to potential investors or labels or what have you. Hey, here is what I can do with very little. What are you willing to do? You know? And in the long run, I decided to actually continue to invest in my education and go take that scholarship to Berkeley and like learn more, because I felt like things were coming too easy. And I didn't really bring enough to the table to understand what was my value and how am I going to be irreplaceable. And I guess like one could not, I guess, non-fungible, like you can't copy me, you know? And I knew that I needed more knowledge. So I decided to continue to invest in myself, which I think in the creative realm is like a really important thing to do. In that I was speaking actually to my cousin. I was just in London, and he runs a venture capitalist firm in the tech world. And I was like, okay, bro, tell me, what do I need to, if I go into a meeting and what is going to sell me on you? And he said a bunch of stuff. But the thing that I really took from it was that the idea can't be easily copyable. And because, you know, then he could just take that, or someone else, if he invests in it, someone else could easily be inspired by it and do something different. So I think the same thing goes for in the creative realm. I really decided to continue to invest in myself. And I would say that I've actually had a lot of luck. I've been very blessed in the space of patronage. And I think that is an old art form that when it comes to creatives, that has been forgotten to a certain extent, that the, you know, Thelonious Monk, that Miles Davis, that even Jimi Hendrix, that some of the biggest rock stars throughout genre, whether it be from the classical realm, the neoclassical realm to rock and roll, had patrons. Because even if you're looking at the way that the record labels are set up, or even if you're looking at the way the entertainment industry is set up, you know, they're not getting that check right away. And they need to have support to be able to be creative, to be able to have shelter, space, home, so that they can do their job and output content. So I was really blessed in that I put together a pitch saying, hey, I need $30,000 to do what I got to do, to own my music, to put out these visuals, to get a team so that I can do what a label would do, because essentially a label is going to put a lot more than that behind that so that you can be creative. That's what it should do. And I was telling people, like, I need $30,000, and I was giving my little presentation, and just as both Chris and Namdi just said, is like, look at who you know and who understands you. And this person who really believed in me, named David Black, may he rest in peace, just said, listen, I'll do it. You know what I mean? And it wasn't $30,000 at once. What he decided to do was invest, like, this is your monthly budget. You can get an intern, you can get, you can be paying your producers your studio time, do all this stuff. This is what I can do monthly for this amount of time. And it was very liberal and non-business-like and very familial. And he was just like Venmoing me stuff. And then I would go put it to work. And then I would show him what I had paid for that month and the products that we had created. And through that, and I'm not going to get emotional, is how we have River Queen, you know, David Black, and, you know, believing in me and saying, you don't need to split your focus, like, focus on writing this film, focus on this music, and I will be, you know, I will be a 15% owner in the culture crew. But he was so giving in that he was like, listen, if you want to sell that person, we'll figure it out. He just wanted me to get it done. And I have to just speak on the art of patronage, as far as like that being a forgotten, lost art in the non-official funding of creative founders, and what, like, Thelonious Monk, again, Jimi Hendrix, a lot of the jazz heads, like, we wouldn't have them if there weren't people who were consuming their music and living off their music creatively and saying, you know what, I believe in this so much that I see that the way this industry is not fair. You're not getting paid what you deserve. So I'm going to help you do your job. That shouldn't be the case anymore. And that's why I've decided to stay to stay independent as long as I have, because I think that there needs to be a larger conversation that for decades, patrons for hundreds of years have been keeping the entertainment industry afloat, because the entertainment industry itself is not giving the money back to the creators as much as it should. So over and over and over and over again, we hear the story of amazing creatives who have created billion-dollar products. Let's just use the example of Big Mama Thornton, who was the original singer of, you know, in rock noir. I have this whole docuseries I'm working on, and I talk about Big Mama Thornton and how she did Hound Dog. She was paid $500 for that song. That song was then handed off to the king of rock, and he then created a $4 billion industry off of Hound Dog alone. So that disparity between, like, the value of the products that are being created, especially by Black creatives and women creatives, and then what they're getting in turn, is the age-old story that's so boring. And what I would like to do is recreate that narrative in saying that there's a way to have ownership over your music and get what you deserve, like get them billions too. But that's what I'm looking towards. I hope that answers your question. I was like kind of
No. I mean, I think that, like, that's part of the reason that I wanted to bring you on the panel, because I think at the end of the day, like, going back, you know, you can start to think of like angel investors for startups as kind of like patrons as well, right? In a lot of cases, they don't really ever expect to get the money back, but they're kind of like mission aligned or driven. And so even if they don't get the money back, they kind of really want to support a cause. And like what people were saying on the angel panels we did before is like, the company usually has to kind of reflect their values or their aspirations in some sense. And so again, they are super okay with losing the money. In fact, you shouldn't give money as an angel investor that you can't lose. It's more about kind of, it's just been called something different, you know, to make it look like more businessy. But like, I think it is kind of a form of patronage, just kind of with a contractual return on investment kind of already kind of locked in. But yeah, I think that's really interesting. And so Gabrielle, I kind of want to talk to you as well, because I know you're having some technical issues, but one of the stats that we talked about in the panel with Goldman Sachs and with Aaron was that the traditional kind of like Black female founder gets about, like, let's say $40,000 in investment, even if she's successful. Whereas the traditional kind of like the typical non-successful, unsuccessful white male founder will get like $1.2 million, right? So there's this huge disparity that was kind of reflected or revealed by Project Diane, I think it was. I think you're kind of like, potentially an example of that, because you do have a very successful business, but it just hasn't been funded by external sources. Tell us a little bit more about like, how did you do that? I mean, obviously, if you can create a business where you don't have to give away any of the equity to anybody else and still have all of that for yourself, that's the best of all worlds. But how did that happen in your case?
Oh.
All right. I guess the question was not definitely answered. We'll wait till she comes back.
Well, but as you wait till she comes back, I want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
Which is that listening to what y'all are doing is very similar to pitching a show, and I've been in the process of pitching my first show, and it's been very interesting. You know what I mean? Just take the business and just put it into like a concept of a show, and then you're going back and forth with, is this valuable? Is this the right fit?
Well, it's all the same thing, because at the end, when you were talking about like being given $5,000 to kind of prove yourself, that sounded to me like what we would call an MVP. You have to come back. The investors, you're calling it a patron. We call it like an angel investor. Pitching, as I was saying in my class this week, it's all the same thing, the same concepts. Like in Hollywood, you would call it like a loggerhead. What was it called? Like a silver bullet, and there's another one, log line, and that's the kind of 1 to 2 sentence description for a pitch. It's the same thing in startup world. So it's like a lot of the same practices kind of like exist in both spaces, and they're probably related. It's just that like we've called them different things. And what I think we should do is we start to kind of just call them the same thing, right? Because particularly when you look at like minority communities, a lot of the most successful people in like, let's say, for example, the Black community in America have been artists. Right. And then they become entrepreneurs later when someone explains to them how business works. Right. So you can become like Oprah or Jay-Z or, Rihanna. You know what I mean? Those are the ones that become the billionaires. And I guess I'm saying like it'll be better if we taught people all that stuff earlier so that they could kind of like figure it out earlier. You know what I mean? Like, because we have a lot of people who have a lot of great talent. But right now, I think people think in certain communities, it's easier to be a rapper or a basketball player than it is to be an entrepreneur. And I think that we kind of want that to change. Like, maybe you can do both. But while we figure out, maybe we'll have to do a separate session with Gabrielle, because I think it's a little her internet is a little too dynamic. So maybe what we can do in the last few minutes that we have together then is we're gonna go around and each of you different domains, different challenges. We have a Black creative woman, Black British kind of legal tech entrepreneur, a non-binary kind of Middle Eastern kind of health tech entrepreneur, but there are like a lot of similarities. So maybe we're going to go around. You guys can just tell us in each case, like what would you've done it. You guys are these like anomalies in terms of being able to kind of be a success case where there aren't too many. What would your key tips be for other founders that might look like you that kind of want to follow in your footsteps? What are the three? Let's limit it to 3 key takeaways. Let's start with Nnamdi this time.
Yeah, Gary, just one thing. I use Nnamdi for a purpose. I'm certainly African before I'm British. So I guess my 3 key tips. I mean, something that's really worked for me is just trying to find a great team. Really, I cannot emphasize how important it is. This journey is lonesome, certainly at the outset. If you're fortunate enough to have people to come on this journey with you, you've got to make sure that, you really find really incredible people that work for you. So I've been really lucky to have some incredible teammates and colleagues, not just my immediate team, but also advisors as well. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, you don't need to wait for your product to be perfect to launch. Certainly I did my first pilot with one of the biggest law firms in the world, and it wasn't ready. I knew it wasn't ready, but I wanted that iteration. I wanted that feedback. I wanted that loop to be quicker. I didn't want to wait 3 years in a lab building and then say into the world, here it is, and actually it's still going to have problems anyway. So don't be afraid to get that product out before it's ready. That's the second thing. I guess the third thing is, like I said earlier on, this is a long and lonesome journey. It's a long and lonesome world. You're going to have to make sacrifices. I had to make a lot of sacrifices. Past the age of 30, I had to move, give up my very nice apartment and move back to my parents' house. And I went 3 years without a salary. I had, very minimum, funds in my accounts and had to take public transport everywhere. Like, there's a sacrifice I had to make from being a corporate lawyer to basically going back to square one again as I was still a student. But at the end of it, if you really believe in what you're doing and you're certainly driven, it will pay dividends. And for me, I'm very, very fortunate about how things turn out.
And so one question I wanted to ask you before is, what did your parents say when they were like, we came here from, Nigeria?
You know what, Gary, in Nigeria, you're either a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer. So I was lucky enough to be a lawyer, but more so my older brother, he's a brain surgeon. So when you have a brain surgeon in your house, there's not much I could do, really. They don't really care about me, to be honest. I'm just here. Whatever I do is, it's an extra bonus. So they've already got their success story. So I was very lucky in that sense.
No, but I know the pressure. Like, when you say I'm moving back home, I mean, I haven't had to do it, but like, I can imagine the pressure of saying I'm moving back home, and they're like, what is going on? So how did you overcome that? Because I guess a lot of founders, that's usually it's the family. I said that is like the biggest obstacle. It was Linda Rottenberg from Endeavor. She was like, the family members a lot of times are the biggest kind of dissuading force, because they're kind of trying to protect you by saying, don't be stupid, you're going to make a big mistake.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've definitely heard that. I think I've been very lucky. From the outset, my parents have been very supportive about everything I wanted to. I gave the story about earlier on about when I wanted to be a lawyer. I only wanted to trade and work at a Magic Circle law firm, and that was me willing to say, hey, I'm not going to be employed until I get that right. And they were willing to be patient with me. So I've been very lucky to have sort of very supportive, family and friends, and the network around me. I know that not everybody's going to have that. I do appreciate. I'm not trying to sort of say everybody's going to have the same sort of support system and network than I did, but I was very lucky from my own sort of point of view.
Awesome. All right, Grace, what would your 3 tips be to anyone? We always hear the expression "starving artist." I think those were the original entrepreneurs, the people who believed so passionately in something that they were willing to kind of forego like normal or typical jobs because they had something creative inside of them that they needed to have be born. What would your 3 tips be for like people who kind of want to follow in your footsteps with the learnings that you've made?
Get hungry. And eat. I don't know. It's a lot. Every day is a different damn day. All the things he talked about, I did. It's a lot. I don't even want to get into the non-glamorous aspects of it and what that can do to you. Because there's a huge contrast in the glamour of performance, but the grit of entrepreneurial enterprise. And so having to go in that room and feeling like a freaking loser because you put everything into this and you gotta like, jazz it up. It's a lot. Like, it's not for everyone. Honestly, sometimes I'm just like, you know what? I'm fine. I don't really have anything I need to say. I don't need to be intentional or make music that's going to be classic. Just give me the check, give me the contract, and send me on my way. Those days happen for sure. But then there are the days when everything works out and the moments and the eras. And I think that I'm kind of on the precipice of that now, of just seeing like the different working pieces of like 10 years of work kind of line up and see that they're making sense. I would have to say that one of the best pieces of advice was super simple that I got from my friend who's like a top award-winning high art photographer in Berlin. He said to me with very bad grammar, he's like, I was like, so what'd you do to do all this? He's like, you gotta want it better than anyone else. And those were his words, and they always come back to me. It's the simpler things that come back to me, because one, you just can't give up. I think that's what it really comes back to. It's like, you just have to make that decision that if you're going to do it, you can't give up. If you want to do this, because this is what I do, and you've seen some of my performance and stuff, it is like a whole body dedicated experience. Like, it is everything. Like, I'm just putting all of it in there. You know what I mean? And I could give more. I would have to say that the rule in my household, because I come from a household of artists, is if you the only way you can do this is if you can't breathe without it. So don't do this because it looks fun. Because honestly, like, it's not. It's not fun. It's hard work. The fun part is oh yay, we just did the show in the garden and now we can have some rosé and all that. And I enjoy it very much so. But if your form of fun is hard work and grit, and I don't look at it as a sacrifice because I love what I do, then don't do it because it looks glamorous. So the number one is I forget, but number two is if you can't breathe without, only do it if you can't breathe without it.
And
what were we gonna say?
No, go ahead.
And then number three, I would say is remember this is what you wanted to do when the times are tough. Like, remember this is your dream. And just get used to it looking different than exactly how the outcome of the dream. I think those are the three things.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty spot on for a lot of entrepreneurs as well. It's kind of like you have to be passionate about solving the problem, because if you think the 15-year journey that it takes and the 90% failure rate are going to be fun to navigate, then you're probably doing it for the wrong reasons. You have to do it because you cannot not do it. But let's hear the last words from, I guess, probably the youngest, Chris. What are your kind of three takeaways for anyone that want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think, as a base, I think we need to recognize, like, as founders, like, there's, it requires like an endless pool of grit, energy, confidence, optimism, and passion, while equally like enduring, the expectations and the pressure to perform and attaining that self-fulfillment, because it really goes back to what do you want to build, and if it's something that matters to you, and that, to Grace's point, then that is like where you should derive like some element, if not all of your strength from. I think the three takeaways I would give, the first would be, your standard grit and determination. Like, do not stop till you get there. Do not stop until your job is over, until you've reached that finish line, whatever that you define as complete. And if you've started something, if you started the fundraising process or you're about to start, it's going to be tough. Recognizing that and knowing it's going to be difficult is the first step. And whatever the outcome is, I think it's good to know that irrespective of what happens, you're already paving the way for generations to come. And I think that within itself is also quite, I would say, like, it's quite nice to think that plays an element in carving out what it's going to look like for others. And I think with being a part of underrepresented group, whether it's like, your sexuality or your gender orientation or whatever it may be, I think we already have ingrained in us this tolerance for rejection. And I think building on that and having a thick skin is only going to help us even more. Because having someone tell you no over and over and over again either makes you question that something's wrong with you, something's wrong with what you're doing, or like this is just not working. And I think the second piece of advice would be build a really strong support network. So same as what you said, Namdi, which is you need to find those people that you can go back to and kind of think of which family, friends, or mentors can you lean on for that emotional support. And that's kind of your safe haven when you want to lick your wounds, recharge, and then go back into the battlefield. So find whatever source of strength is for you, because that will help you through the entire process. And the third one is do not compromise. Like, don't stop till you find the right people you're comfortable with working with in the long run. Just don't compromise. And I'll actually finish with a quote that my mentor and really good friend, Angelia Muller, once said, which is the fact that you have to think of your cap table as who you want to enrich in your lifetime, not who can give you money. And you don't really ever need permission from anyone to build what you believe needs to exist in this world. So take that away and always be kind to yourself and really celebrate the small wins, I'd say, as well.
Well, I think this has been an awesome panel. 3 very different kind of personalities and businesses, but all kind of coming to the same kind of general conclusion, which is like, you just have to believe in yourself. Don't give up. Forget about all the haters. And at the end of the day, like, it's really wonderful. Like when you get the article in TechCrunch or Sifted or on the cover of a magazine, in your case, Grace, and everyone's like, oh my God, life looks wonderful. But the real version of how you got there is a lot less sexy, and it's a lot more about kind of grit and determination. So I think that thank you for sharing those kind of like real world stories with everyone else. I think a lot of founders just kind of only see the magazine covers and they just kind of get disappointed and start to doubt themselves. And only by hearing from the stories of people who've done it successfully can they realize they're not freaks, they're just entrepreneurs. So thank you for that. And thanks. Have a good evening, those of you that are in the UK, and have a good afternoon, those of you that are in the East Coast. And to everyone else who's listening, thank you for spending the time with us. I think, again, this was a great panel. And download FounderTribes. We just did our beta version, so we would love for you to get your feedback and love to help you access mentors and investors so that you can become some of these success cases like the guys and women on the panel today. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Gary.